When life gets unpredictable, preparation matters. In medicine, it's all about staying alert, ready for whatever comes through the door. On the road, it's no different. That's why Volvo designs vehicles to help anticipate risk, reduce harm, and protect lives. The Volvo XC90's advanced safety systems inspire confident decisions wherever the road takes you. The Volvo XC90, for life. Proud sponsor of the Pit Podcast. Learn more at volvocars.ca/safety.
Continuing things here on the Elias Macko Show, and we're going to head straight over to our next guest, Michael Geist. Michael Geist is a law professor at the University of Ottawa, and he's looking for answers. Now, this week, the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage conducted a long overdue hearing on the department's funding of Laith Marouf, a known anti-Semite. And get this, get the funding as part of an anti-hate program. I've had questions on this program. We've discussed it on the Big Five and in other segments. And Michael Geist has been all over this subject as well. He's on the line. Michael, welcome back to the program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
You ask a lot of questions here, and I want to go through some of them. How is it possible, that out of 100 communications that officials in Canadian Heritage had, none of them raised concerns over tweets and other indications about Laith Marouf, and ended up funding his group, his firm, to the tune of $130,000. How's it possible, Michael?
Yeah, it's a question that I think we still don't have an answer to, and I think that's part of the problem. The focus has been, I think understandably, on delays that took place in various ministers' offices. Minister Hussein, for example, who's responsible for this program, was notified by his own cabinet, by his own colleague, Anthony Housefather, Montreal MP, and did nothing for a week. He notified the department. They did nothing for a week. Pablo Rodriguez, the heritage minister, who is in charge of online harms and has been conducting a number of roundtables on anti-Semitism, has still, 6-7 months later, never publicly released a statement specifically about this. But at the same time, we could even go back further, because there were people out there, people like Mark Goldberg, a telecom consultant in Toronto, who was raising the tweets and the funding months before even Housefather brought it to the minister's attention. The department has, they told us, 100 communications officials who are monitoring these things. The notion that somehow nobody saw this when it was targeted directly at the department is just completely not credible.
And we can talk about the anti-Semitism, but we can also bring up everything else about Laith Marouf, right? The anti-American comments, the anti-Francophone comments. If it's part of the West and Western values, he doesn't seem to be a fan of it. I have to ask you, Michael, what do you think's going on in Ottawa that the government of Canada can hire people that don't seem to be aligned that much with Western values?
Well, listen, I think there's two issues here. There's the issue of how does a guy like this get a contract like this? And I agree with you. It is perplexing at best. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. And, I think the officials within the department said, hey, listen, basically, we screwed up. That they didn't conduct the due diligence they should have, although I think most people say this wasn't rocket science. A basic Google search would have turned this up. So that suggests incompetence. But beyond that, I think there is a more fundamental question about the response once they were aware or ought to have been aware. So we get apologies, to be sure, but absolutely no accountability.
Well, what's been worse here? Is it the crime or the cover-up?
Well, I think it is the response that at the end of the day is worse. I mean, mistakes happen. This is inexcusable. And I think the department has recognized that. They've talked about some of the changes they're going to make to try to ensure this kind of thing doesn't slip through the cracks. It is, I say, it's astonishing that it would have in the first place. But the response afterward is what really bothers me. Pablo Rodriguez, we're going to ask this person, or the government has said he is going to lead on online harms. How does someone get responsibility to lead with online harms-related legislation when they can't even own up to the fact that their own government, their own Canadian heritage, was funding an anti-Semite as part of an anti-hate program?
And Michael, does this speak to deeper ills within the government? Like this is this a symptom of a bigger problem in how the Liberal government handles certain dossiers?
Well, I think there's a couple elements to your question. One, I think too much of what we see on these kinds of files, and I don't want to discount the importance of dealing with things like online hate. I think it's very important. I'm glad the government does it. But too much of it feels wrapped up in virtue signaling. It's not about fundamentally addressing the issue. It's more about saying that you're doing something, and this is important. And I think that we see that on a lot of files. I think we see it on a lot of the digital files that we see coming out of Rodriguez's office, where it's more symbolism than it is actually trying to solve a problem. And so even on something like C-11, we now have the Quebec government, the National Assembly, saying they're concerned with the legislation. No real questions about how any of this gets implemented. It's too much virtue signaling, not enough substance. But beyond that, on especially the anti-Semitism issue, which personally really strikes directly to the heart, I have a hard time believing that we would see this non-response if other groups were targeted. And, that's not to say that I'm glad that the government will respond quickly when other groups are targeted. But I don't understand for the life of me how anti-Semitism isn't viewed in the same light as some of these other issues.
We're with Michael Geist from the University of Ottawa. So, Michael, then this leads me to a touchy question here. Does this current Liberal government have an issue with anti-Semitism? I can point out, to some people they've welcomed into the party, whether it's people crossing the floor from the Greens that have had views that a lot of people would say are anti-Semitic, hiring people that, it's not just Latham Roof, by the way, that have some sort of connection to an anti-Israel, at least, sentiment, which a lot of people say, well, they call it anti-Israel, but it's actually anti-Semitism. Do you think this government and some of the ministers in this government have a problem with that?
Yeah, listen, I'm reluctant to call out those kind of motivations. I don't know that we know that. But what I do think is that action speaks louder than words, and we haven't seen action here. And so at a minimum, I do think that what we have here is a case where there are at least people that, for whatever reason, don't seem to understand that the Jewish community often feels vulnerable. I think there's good reason for that. And it is perplexing that on other issues, there's an immediate reaction, an immediate source of concern, and on this issue, silence. I mean, I think, for example, of Housefather, who I think has been one of the few MPs willing to speak out on these issues, give him 100% credit. And he's been left hung out to dry by his own colleagues. I mean, he literally called on fellow MPs to speak out on this issue, to speak out on anti-Semitism, and so many of them remain silent.
And just to that, Anthony Housefather, so we know that he sent messages to the Minister of Housing and Diversity and Inclusion, and nothing happened until there was a media uproar. If the media had never found out about this story, if Anthony Housefather sends these internal messages, but it never gets into the pages of newspapers and on the web, do you think they would have done something?
No, I don't. And I think the proof in that is that this was being raised on Twitter for months, even before Housefather raised it. And nothing happened. It is, I think, strains credibility to suggest that someone within that department, you got 100 people monitoring social media, there's people being tweeted at on this issue, someone must have seen it, and they simply must have decided that it wasn't a risk to the government, and so they did nothing. And so I don't think we have to speculate as to whether anything would have happened or not. We know nothing would have happened because we know nothing did happen for months and months and months, even though this was being identified by people online.
Michael, I always appreciate your reasoned and calm arguments and discussion points on this program. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
That's Michael Geist, law professor at the University of Ottawa.